Okay, hello and welcome to another expert interview. My name is John Golden from Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP online sales magazine. And today I'm joined by Andy Gole. Hey Andy, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Good, good. And Andy, I want to talk to you about your selling system that you train people on called urgency-based selling. So let's get straight into it. What do you mean by urgency-based selling?
Well, our sense is that folks are never going to change their position unless they have a sense of urgency.
Hmm.
So the incumbency position is very strong. In fact, sometimes the incumbency position is doing nothing. It's
Right.
continuing to do nothing. And sometimes we're not trying to take the business away from a competitor, but we're just trying to get somebody to start a new behavior. And so the overall sense is it's hard to get people to change their behavior, and we need to create a sense of urgency for them to do that or tap into their sense of urgency.
Hmm. Because and often, obviously, urgency is can change over time. So how do you work with people? Because this is a common problem that comes up that I often hear from people. It's when they initially engage with somebody, when they're a salesperson, they initially engage with the prospect. There is some sense of urgency there on behalf of the prospect. But over time, during the sales cycle, that urgency actually dissipates rather than increases. So how do you overcome that?
Well, I think that when the average prospect brings us in, the default situation is we're a price check.
Hmm.
So that the actual urgency that the prospect feels is they want to see if they can buy what they currently have better.
Hmm.
But they don't tell us that because if I was to say to you, listen, John, there's no chance I'm ever going to buy from you,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
But would you mind spending 10 hours working on a proposal for me so I could take your proposal and beat the living heck out of your competitor who's the incumbent?
Right.
You're not motivated to do that.
Sure.
So the sense of urgency I'm showing you as a buyer in the beginning of the relationship is till I get your proposal.
Right.
And so when the salesperson said, "Gee, they seemed really excited in the beginning, but then over time, it faded." It may have been I mean, that happens sometimes,
Sure.
like,
Sure.
the context changes, but I think on a fundamental level, most buyers are running what I call the buyer scam when they invite in a new potential vendor.
Hmm.
And so there never was an urgency to change. And therefore, it's up to the salesperson to create or tap into a true sense of urgency for change.
Right.
In
So
fact, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so how does a salesperson do that?
Well, in the first 15 to 30 minutes or even less of the first meeting, I think that the buyer puts us into one of two buckets,
Hmm.
safe or serious. Safe or serious. So safe means we're a price check, and serious means um, they have a compelling need. They're willing to discuss it, and they're willing to evaluate if we meet that. And we need to get into that second bucket
Hmm.
where we're seen as a really serious potential for them. And in order to do that, we have to identify very early on what I call a material difference, a difference we could make that's so strong it motivates a change in behavior. And the change we're looking for is from safe, price check, to serious. Wow, maybe I need to change what I'm doing. So that's one of two things we need to do early on. We need to make this very compelling case with a material difference. I often call it a bold vision.
Hmm.
And then in addition, we need to make it believable. We need to address skepticism and risk aversion. If we don't address skepticism and risk aversion, the prospect is almost compelled to stay with the current source.
Right. Right, so that's quite a tall order for the beginning of a conversation, right? So,
It is. It
how,
is.
so how does it? So talk me through what many salespeople do today and how they should change that to be able to execute what you're talking about.
Well, in my experience, salespeople like to lighten the load at the beginning and have a kind of a social conversation,
Hmm.
and then they have an awkward transition to business, and they never pull the prospect into what I call a serious conversation
Right.
where you actually have a chance. So we teach a 7-step warming up procedure, which focuses on creating a business relationship
Hmm.
versus social only.
Gotcha.
If you create a business relationship or get on that path, then you have a shot at doing legitimate fact finding. And after you do the fact finding, you could determine, is there really a fit? Can we really meet this prospect's needs? So some of the things we want to do early on is bond on a business level. As an example, I might look at your website and see that you have testimonial letters on your website.
Hmm.
And I'll say to you, gee, in preparing for this meeting, I went on your website and I noticed that you had testimonial letters. So I'm just kind of curious, why do you put testimonial letters on your website? Hey, why do you put testimonial letters on? Why would you do that?
um, well, if you're asking me,
Yeah,
it's a credentialing exercise,
okay.
and
So you
it's personalization.
so you do that to tell the world how you're seen by your customers. So
And
I got it. When you sell, you use testimonial letters, right?
hmm.
How about when you buy?
How do you mean?
Well, you put testimonials on your website because when you're selling, you want to use testimonial letters, right? But do you use them to qualify the vendors from whom you buy?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Do you use them? Oh, okay. Because I have some really fantastic testimonial letters. I'd like to show you some of the company I keep, and would you mind reading this particular one?
Hmm.
So that's a little procedure to bond in a business way and set up a conversation where the prospect would probably be open to reading a testimonial early on. So we have material difference, strong, bold vision, and proving.
Hmm.
Those two things, having them in the first 15 minutes of the first conversation, it gives the prospect a reason why they should be in a serious conversation. So that's
Right.
an example.
No, I think that's a great example, and I do agree with you that there's a lot of a lot of salespeople have come up in in different schools of thought around how to open a conversation. But I think to your point, today everybody is so busy or perceives themselves to be so busy. I think there's a difference between the two, and they have lower attention spans, etc. So I think getting to business quickly is something that most buyers appreciate, right?
I would think so. And again, it's important to reflect what kind of relationship are you forming.
Hmm.
And so I wouldn't say don't have a social
Sure.
relationship, but you want to have like yin and yang, you want to have a combination
Yeah.
early on.
And if you had to choose between the two, obviously the business one is the one to have.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
So what other areas of tell me a little bit more about urgency based selling? Okay, so there's the opening and getting people to business conversations quickly. What else is involved in this?
Well, from studying over a dozen different selling systems, which I think better remain nameless here, I might get into
Hmm.
trouble. These selling systems, I think, were developed for the most part in simpler, better times, less world competition. And as a result, although they had and still have three fatal flaws, which I'm going to mention,
Hmm.
they could succeed in marketplaces that were less competitive. So one of the keys to urgency-based selling is identifying these three fatal flaws that seem to be common to virtually every selling system I looked at and resolving them within the standard sales called the step-by-step procedure to open an opportunity, determine if we have a fit, and then meet the need and close it. So
Hmm.
here are the three fatal flaws, and I've already touched on the first one. The first fatal flaw is assuming you're in a serious conversation because the prospect's talking to you.
Sure.
Remember, it's safe versus serious.
Hmm.
So we expect that it's going to start out as safe, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Hmm.
It's our job to earn the right to the serious conversation. So one of the aspects of the an important aspect of urgency-based selling is converting safe to serious and having that appreciation. The second fatal flaw is assuming that if the prospect is giving you positive vibes and body language, that they believe what you say.
Hmm.
A better presumption is they don't believe anything you say, and you need to be armed to the gills to deal with skepticism and risk aversion.
Hmm.
And the third fatal flaw is assuming the prospect knows how to make a good decision. And typically, um, big changes are an infrequent decision.
Correct.
And so we need to have a very powerful method that teaches the prospect how to make a good decision. So we call these the three fatal flaws of selling. And if your selling system doesn't deal with them, then it's very hard to do business development. The buyer can buy at any time,
Hmm.
but it's very hard to sell because you have these huge gaping holes. So that's one key to urgency-based selling is having the sensitivity and then developing a selling procedure that deals with. For instance, remember that procedure I told you about? Hey, you have great
Sure.
testimonials.
Hmm.
Why do you have those testimonials? Do you only use them when you sell? How about when you buy? Well, one of the purposes of doing that early on is to deal with the second fatal flaw, which is I don't believe anything you say.
Right. Right.
So the other major distinction, or another major distinction, is mindset. It's between social selling and business selling.
Hmm.
So most of us enter the marketplace as social sellers, meaning we know what is socially appropriate behavior,
Right.
and we learned this somewhere between the ages of maybe 12 and 15.
Hmm.
And if we engage in socially appropriate behavior, we're doomed. We're doomed for business development. So an essential part of urgency based selling is mindset training, helping salespeople develop the right mindset, which is not social selling, be my friend, it's business selling, be my profitable customer, let me take care of you
Hmm.
so that you want to be my customer. So that's a huge, huge difference because so many salespeople learn by an early age that selling is somehow contemptuous. Um, Thinking about the
Hmm.
influence of a book like Death of a Salesman.
Sure.
Willie Loman is the slimy
Hmm.
loser.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this infiltrates, infects. It's how buyers see salespeople, but also salespeople
See themselves.
internalize it. So
Hmm.
what we do is we do a sales cultural change where we teach the salesperson as hero.
Hmm.
Because if someone sees themselves in heroic terms, that will sustain them for a lifetime of selling. That's our view.
Yeah, and totally agree, and I would and it would very much be in lockstep with our own view here, where we see the salespeople within an organization as being the entrepreneurs within the organization, what we
Yeah.
call the salespreneurs. And then beyond that, we see salespeople in critical in the fact that they are the leading edge of trade.
Mm,
And when people trade fairly together, it creates a better society and a peaceful society because it's hard to trade with people if you're shooting at each other. So we would agree with that change of mindset because it's very fascinating to see that 99.9% of the portrayals of salespeople throughout the decades in TV and movies have been negative, right? So
mm.
it's not hard to see that. So how did you find that is a hard, or is that a difficult thing to do, to change, not on an intellectual level? Sure, you could probably get through to most people, but on a more kind of deeper emotional level, how hard is it to change that mindset for salespeople?
Well, I would say it's really hard. And so we've worked out a series of techniques over the years, and it's not just the training,
Hmm.
the exercises, it's tremendous support required from top management, from sales management. So there's many levels to it. And when a sales team changes, I often find it's like a new product introduction. You'll see that, there's a risk taker and an innovator. There's
Hmm.
somebody who will try first. To give you an example of what I mean, I once worked with about 25 salespeople who sold for a chain of hotels, room blocks, and weddings. And, there was slow adoption in the beginning.
Hmm.
And eventually, I think we got 24 in our team. And we finally had one, though, who's a holdout who said, "You don't understand, Andy. My hotel is different than all the other hotels."
Of course.
And so there's that view that what I do is special. And so to deal with that, we do case histories that are from within the space. Everything is highly customized
Hmm.
and tailored. So yes, it is very challenging. And so you need support from ownership, if there's an executive team, sales management, very challenging.
So, in the last few minutes of our chat here, let me ask you, where do you see, there's been a lot of talk about sales changing, the buyer behavior changing, and all of that. What other changes do you see on the horizon, and what do you see staying the same, and what do you see changing and evolving even more?
Well, I think that the more standard purchase can very often be automatized.
Hmm.
Um, we don't need a salesperson in so many situations as we did historically. Um, I think that certain situations will still require salespeople, education, infrequent purchase, high risk, high dollar value. So I wouldn't be surprised if machines or computers or algorithms took over standard decision making.
Hmm.
But these kind of decisions, high risk, high dollar value, I still think uh, you're going to need salespeople going into the future. I would also say that introductions are going to continue to be key, and maybe even more so because it's so hard to get through to people.
Hmm.
You know, voicemail, email, people don't respond.
Sure.
So working on inviting or asking your big fans to help you out will become possibly even more important than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice. I think the referral selling is still way underutilized. Amazingly, I don't quite know why, but it still is. Okay, well, listen, thanks, Andy, for today. Could you just spend a couple of moments, tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, about your company, and about what you do and how they might contact you?
Well, sure. Thanks for that opportunity. So I've been offering this service for over 2 decades, and we have a website. It's www.urgencybasedselling.net. And there's a whole series of deliverables that we describe on the website. But just to summarize some of the key deliverables, you got the sales culture is critical, the standard sales call, the proving kit, the battle plan, and the book of knowledge, each of which have subcomponents to it. I got into this. I had two businesses before I did the sales consulting and training and coaching. I started by being a commissioned sales agent for factories selling packaging, decorative tin packaging. And through that, I developed the rudiments of the system because I was selling into an entrenched situation in a declining business. And so that's my mindset. When people say to me, "You don't understand how hard this business is, it's a commodity," that's how I learned on I didn't even have a commodity. It was a little bit below par. So that's a little bit about the background. I taught for 8 years at Fairleigh Dickinson University's Rothman Institute of Entrepreneurial Studies. I taught mostly sales theory, and I'd love to hear from people. So thank you
Well,
for this opportunity.
yeah, thank you, Andy, again for joining today and talking about urgency based selling. My name is John Golden. This is Expert Interviews brought to you by Pipeliner CRM and SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine. And we'll see you for another expert interview very soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.